Welcome to the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, wife, mother of two, and a homemaker by choice. Around here, slow living isn't a trend or an aesthetic, it's a lived seasonal rhythm, and it's a gentle revolution. In these episodes, I share reflections on living at a human pace, tending to our small home, growing food on a balcony and at the allotment, and finding joy in the ordinary days. This is a space to question default, to step out of the rush and to choose a quieter, more intentional way of living. If you're ready to join the unhurried revolution, then you're in the right place. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Slow Living Collective podcast. Today I want to talk about seasons, and I want to talk about them in two ways. I want to firstly talk about literal physical seasons of the year. And secondly, I want to talk about the quieter, less visible seasons of our lives. And they're very different things, but they are deeply connected. And learning to recognize that connection has changed the way I move through my days. So we're really used to thinking about seasons of the year in a fairly surface way. We notice the weather, the light, the temperature. We mark them with maybe different clothes we wear, different routines we have, maybe a few rituals. But underneath that, seasons are doing something more fundamental. They are setting the pace of the entire world around us. And I'm a big proponent of seasonal living, but I actually think although that is one of the center points of my work. So I have things like, if you're part of my Substack paid membership, in there I have 4 seasonal courses, workshops, I'd say, four seasonal workshops that help you live with the season a bit better. So I have obviously spring, summer, autumn and winter. I also have an additional bonus one for having a slow and simple Christmas, but that is some of the bulk of my work. And then also my course that I have, which is it's called Rooted in Seasons. So again, seasonal focus, but by way of sharing with you and showing you how when you start to incorporate the seasons into your life, by doing so, you are able to tap in, I think, really well into slowing down, simplifying, living more seasonally, and making this sort of, although it's a slow, small, incremental change, it is transformational in the base of your life. And so I am a big fan of the seasons because I think they are fundamental to the entire thing. And so I have those things. It is the bulk of my work, and it is, like I said, fundamental in setting the pace of the world around us. Now, winter slows things down, whether we like it or not. Growth pauses, energy turns inward, there's less light, we feel more tired. And then spring comes, and where we are now, spring brings movement back in, not all at once, but then summer hits and it expands and everything is bright and busy and fun and warm. And then autumn starts that slow descent into winter. It gathers and releases. And so the natural world around us never fights these shifts. It doesn't try to maintain the same output year round. It doesn't apologize in winter when it's dormant. It doesn't rush its own timing. Everything happens when it should. And yet we often expect ourselves to rush, right? We live as if the season outside shouldn't affect us. We live as if our energy, our capacity, our creativity and our pace should remain stable regardless of the light, the weather, the rhythm. And we just can't sustain that, because when winter feels particularly heavy or summer feels overwhelming, we turn that into a personal failure. And it's not a personal failure. It's just about understanding where we are. And when you let the physical season be what it has or what it is, it allows you to let your body and home respond honestly to the time of year that you're in. So winter, for example, for me is very quiet. very, very quiet. It is slower. It is more repetitive. I don't expect much of myself. If creativity comes, but I don't expect anything of myself. I don't expect myself to be outward facing. I don't expect myself to be expansive. I don't expect to be able to tolerate some things that I tolerate in, busier seasons. And I build my days around warmth, routine, and rest where I can. And I know what you're thinking. Well, I didn't have time for that, Amy. And it's okay for you because you didn't have a traditional job and your children don't go to school. And I hear it. I do hear it. But you don't have to quit your job, pull your kids out of school to live with a little more simplicity or to live in line with the seasons. You can do all of these things. Just like if this were a podcast about home education and I'm saying, we learn by going on holiday. Like you guys go on holiday too, right? And your kids are learning there too, right? It's not a one size fits all thing. So like I said, it throughout the winter particularly, I don't expect much of myself. And then when spring comes, I don't demand like an instant renewal. I just let the energy return gradually. I notice what wants to wake up within me and what doesn't. And just honouring the physical seasons. It's not about romanticising them. Some of them are hard. Winter's hard. But it is about listening to, what is occurring naturally around us. And living seasonally is not a wild concept. It's not a consumerism or capitalism based concept. It is the oldest concept that exists on this planet. And it's not about me teaching you how to do that. It's about helping you rediscover actually the root of who you are and why living seasonally is the most natural way of being. And it's understandable that we feel so disconnected from it because the world as it has progressed and as we live in this modern society, it doesn't want us to be connected with the seasons, because when we connect with the seasons, we have to admit to the fact that we are not going to sustain the same output year round. And capitalism doesn't love that, I don't think. It wants us to be always on, but ultimately it burns us out too. So things like, just noticing the season outside can have a tremendous difference to the way you live. And, if you are interested in learning more about that, of course, like I've mentioned, I have a couple of workshops on my paid membership and you can access those. They're over on Substack. And I do also have my Rooted in Seasons course. I'll put the links for everything in the show notes. You can decide what works and what doesn't. But that isn't the only season, right? So the second kind of season that exists are the seasons of our personal lives. And they ask for the same thing, the same honesty, but they're just slightly different. So life seasons are not neat or predictable. They don't follow calendars. They arrive through circumstance, responsibility, change, loss, growth. And unlike the weather and nature, we're often taught to resist them. And there are multiple different seasons, and you can line them up with the actual seasons. So there's lots of things that occur cyclically, let's say. So if you are someone who menstruates, for example, then you will know that the cycle can very easily be divided into the same 4 parts as the seasons can. So when you are bleeding, that's like winter. And then when you are in your follicular phase, leading up to ovulation, when you're in your follicular phase, you are, in your spring. You're emerging. You're getting ready to go. Around ovulation, summer, peak. Everything is fantastic. Then your luteal phase, as you start to wind down to bleeding again, autumn. Everything is very cyclical. And the seasons of our lives can be applied, to the actual seasons as well. If you're going through a tough time, you might be like, gosh, this feels like winter. If you are in a good phase of life, you might be like, I feel like I'm in the summer part of my life. spring and autumn the same. But there are also seasons, where you can think of things slightly differently as well. There's seasons of building, for example, or seasons where you're tending or you're holding things together, or seasons of rest or recovery or recalibration. And just like the seasons of the year, they aren't chosen, but they can be met. They can be met right where you are. And I think one of the quiet pressures that many of us carry is the idea that we should be able to override our life season, just like we can try and override the physical season, and that, we can push through it, optimize our way out of it, or reframe it into something more productive. But life seasons, just as nature's seasons, they're not problems that we need to solve. They're something that we should live inside and, just let it be what it is, because that doesn't mean giving up. It just means recognizing where your energy is and what it's being directed towards. And, showing you that actually when your capacity is limited, it's not because you're failing, but it's just because something else requires you. And, in my own life, letting the season be what it has kind of meant releasing pressure to constantly narrate everything as progress, because some seasons, they're not really about becoming, they're just about staying where you are and just sustaining where you are, just keeping things going sometimes. And it's really interesting how often life seasons and physical seasons mirror each other. Winter arriving outside can actually often coincide with sort of like a season of contraction or being inside. Spring can obviously feel hopeful but still fragile. Autumn can feel full but heavy. They don't always align either, and that's okay. Sometimes it's summer outside and it's winter inside, right? Sometimes life is expanding for you while the world is slowing down. So just letting the season be what it is means allowing that mismatch without trying to correct it, and just loosening your grip on who you think you're meant to be right now. You might not be in your most productive season. You might not be at your fastest pace. You might not be the version of yourself you were before life changed in some way. And a quieter season doesn't erase your capability, and a slower season doesn't mean you've lost momentum forever. They're not gone, they're just resting, and you need to give yourself that space, because rest, whether it's out in the natural world in the seasons or in our life seasons, it's not an absence, it's just part of the cycle. And I think one of the hardest parts of letting seasons be what they are in both senses is just trusting that they will change, that, if you stop pushing, you're not going to disappear. And if you soften, you're not going to get stuck here forever. Seasons move whether we cooperate with them or not, just like the seasons outside. Most people do not love winter. That doesn't stop it coming. But the good thing about winter is it does end. There is an end point, and spring will come again. And that happens. That is the same with the seasons that we meet internally as well. And so whatever season you're in right now, whether it's physical or personal, if it feels slow, heavy, unremarkable, I want you to hear this. You don't need to force it to be someone else. You don't need that. You are who you are. You don't need to make it productive. You don't need to push or rush your way through it. Some seasons are about growth. Some are about harvesting what you've done, and some are just purely about rest. But also some are just simply being held right where you are, and just letting the season be the season internally and externally outside your window. Letting it just be is actually a special kind of wisdom. It's choosing to live in rhythm with your life instead of in conflict with it. And that, I think, is one of the most intentional choices that you can make. Okay guys, that's it for today's episode. I hope that was helpful and made you sort of rethink what seasons are. I would love you to come over and check out My Substack, I speak a lot about seasonal living in the physical sense of like the seasons over there. I would love you to dive into it with me. Seasonal living is not a trend. Seasonal living is actually just tapping into one of the oldest rhythms that this planet has for us, and it's just tapping back into something that is inherently natural. We just need to tap back into it, and I feel like once you can sort of tap back into the seasons and understand the ebbs and flows and the way we're meant to live without putting too much pressure on it, the other things actually come along with relative ease. So you will actually find that at certain points you feel better equipped to slow down, and you feel better equipped to embrace simplicity more, and you're more intentional with the life that you're leading, and you will naturally lean into the ebbs and flows, and there's no pressure around that. And that's why I think it sits at the base of everything when it comes to slow, simple and intentional living. So come find me over on Substack. That's theslowlivingcollective.substack.com, or find me over on Instagram at The Slow Living Collective, and I will catch you in the next episode.